Bob will get the Heart Sutra on the screen. As usual, we're reciting this because of not just it's a wonderful text to recite, but also because this is a class on the Heart Sutra. By the way, one thing I keep forgetting to mention is that it's really ideal if you can memorize the Heart Sutra. I've been reciting it every day since around 2000, 2001, something like that, 20 years now. And so once you recite it, then of course you memorize it, and then it's really good to have that kind of at your disposal as a memorized text. So it'd be good if you could do that. It's such a short sutra. So, all right, so let's go ahead and do the recitation of this together. Again, trying to bring to mind as we go through this your own understanding of emptiness that's set out in these words. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Mass of Vultures Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. We do the short mandala offering, visualizing a vast pure offering that we make to all the holy beings so we can receive their inspiration and blessings, align ourselves with them so that we can then become just like them. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then finally, refuge in bodhicitta, as usual, first time in English, the other 2 times in Tibetan, and bring to mind these 2 thoughts of finding, heartfelt refuge, safe direction in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and then also generating the motivation of bodhicitta, which we'll also meditate on right after this. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyabsu Chi Daki Chanyen Gipe Sonam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shok Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsu Chi Daki Chanyen Gipe Sonam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shok. Okay, thank you, Bob. Let's do a short meditation before we begin. Give ourselves a chance to calm the mind a bit using the breath as a meditation object. And again, I'm sure you all have a technique you can use with the breath. Just do that for the next few minutes in silence. And then after that, I'll lead you in a short reflection to strengthen our bodhicitta motivation for doing this class together. So I'll ring the bell to begin the meditation period. So now let's turn our attention towards generating the best motivation for being here tonight. And recall how we often speak about this path to enlightenment as entailing these two elements that are comparable to the two wings of a bird. If a bird is to make it to its destination, it requires both wings. It cannot fly with just one. And while we're studying the wing of wisdom in this course, primarily, looking at how we develop this insight into the nature of reality to discern the wisdom of emptiness, we have to do that with the other wing intact as well. We have to make sure that we don't come to these teachings with solely the motivation to develop wisdom. We have to unite it with our method, the compassionate wing, the wing that is acknowledging that to do this simply for ourselves would be quite meaningless in some ways. And we want to develop that wisdom so that we can be of greater benefit to others. So we need to have that wing of compassionate method fully developed as well. And that's what we're doing in our motivation, is making sure that we bring that compassion, that concern for other sentient beings into our study of this topic of the wisdom of emptiness. So we can do this by thinking about how, as the Buddha sets out so clearly in all of his teachings, this is the main reason why sentient beings are suffering, is because they don't have access to this wisdom. Even if they have access to it, often they're not interested in it or fail to investigate it further. But most beings are simply going about their business, following their karma, without any inkling about what is actually going on, what is the true nature of reality. Driven by that ignorance, they create the causes to just continue their stay in the round of suffering, cyclic existence. So when we see that they're in that condition, we generate that compassionate wish that they not be in that state, especially acknowledging that every one of these beings has been very dear and kind to you in maybe not this life, but certainly in other lifetimes. So we begin to develop a deep drive to benefit these beings, to do what we can to help them. And the way that we can help them most deeply is through developing our own wisdom and then being able to impart that wisdom to others. So again, with that compassionate motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to develop yourself into the state of Buddhahood, your greatest potential. Think that you're here tonight in order to accomplish that goal, so you then can help all sentient beings to know this wisdom of emptiness, to be free from their own causes of suffering, and to attain Buddhahood as well. And hold this motivation very deeply in your own heart throughout tonight's class, as well as the rest of this week, this month, this year, this life, and even beyond, all the way to enlightenment. Okay, great. Good to see so many of you tonight here. So we are working our way through the Heart Sutra. This is our fourth class of the 8 classes we have scheduled for this course. We haven't gotten deeply into the text yet. We just were talking about the title of the text last week. Today we're going to start with the prologue, kind of the setup for the text. Of course, we just read the Heart Sutra together, so it's those first few paragraphs. And I'm hoping we can even get into Shariputra asking the question of Avalokiteshvara. And I don't know if we'll get into Avalokiteshvara's answer yet, but I do want to just dive right into things. But let me just give a basic outline of what we're going to do tonight. We did do discussion groups last week, and we got some feedback on that. And it does seem like, it would be ideal if we could find a way for people to participate in a discussion group with someone leading the groups and making sure things kind of stay on track and that there's a deeper investigation into the material. So what we're going to do is, rather than do those, and the other concerns also came came up for me was that it doesn't allow a lot of time for questions. And so, and also a number of people felt like they needed to exit at that point because maybe they thought the discussion was going to be over their heads. So we're going to restructure things. What we're going to do in the classes going forward is that I'll end at about 8:15, which is about when I'll end tonight. We'll have about a 10-minute break. When we come back, we'll just do a larger group Q&A kind of thing and see what questions people have. Might be a little discussion involved in that, but it won't be in separate groups. And then if there aren't enough questions, I'll certainly go back to the material and cover a little bit more material, and we'll end at our usual time. Tonight, though, we're going to end about 10 minutes early, so we'll cut the Q&A period a little bit. And that's so that in those final 10 minutes, those people who would like to do discussion group, who really feel compelled to investigate at that level, can all meet for that 10 minutes and try to find a time between the Wednesdays to do that that would work for you. And Shanka has agreed to facilitate those groups, and there might not be then quite as many people who'll be involved in that, and it can be, again, people who really want to more deeply investigate the teachings through discussion, since again it sounded like not everybody was game for doing that. And so we just want to make this time that we do have together that we've scheduled as productive as possible for everyone, and then allow another time for those people who would like to do the discussion. So hopefully that'll work for this course. We're going to try it out. There is only, again, about 4 more weeks after tonight, so it's not a big commitment in terms of additional time, but we'll see how it works for this basic program course. And then Mary and other people involved will figure out how they want to move forward with this. While it is ideal if we can do discussion groups, the problem with Zoom is it's got that algorithm and just throws people wherever. And so you don't know who's all ending up in a group, who might be the potential group leader to kind of keep people, investigating the topics, what have you. So it becomes a bit problematic. If we were all together and at the center or something, then we could break out into rooms in different parts of the center and have, people kind of doing all that. But on Zoom, it's just not maybe the ideal thing. But again, so that's the plan for tonight. Let me go ahead and get us back into the material with the slides that I've prepared for tonight. Again, I'm not going to do a whole lot of review because we really haven't gone through that much of the text itself yet. I did want to just go back and visit really briefly one little line that came from page 12 of your text. Actually, is it page 12? No, I'm sorry, it must be page 10. That's wrong. That's an error on my part. Page 10. We were talking there about kind of this idea of paramita in the title. Paramita, again, means to go beyond or to transcend. And there were different examples in terms of what that is referring to. Beyond a common being, or an ordinary being, as it's sometimes called, is a superior, an Arya. Beyond the conventional is the ultimate. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight, but that's also a topic coming up in this course, the conventional truth versus the ultimate truth. Beyond samsara is nirvana, our cyclic existence and what we're conditioned to experience, versus nirvana, which is freedom from all those factors. And beyond ignorance is knowledge. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about this idea of an Arya and point out kind of the different paths that beings practice to get to a state where they would call themselves an Arya, because there are differences in terms of who those Arya beings are. Essentially, we can say that there are 4 types of Arya beings. Arya is loosely translated as superior. Sometimes they use the word noble, like the Arya truths, the truths of an Arya. They call them the 4 noble truths. But the idea here is that these are people who have a superior knowledge, those who have the wisdom directly realizing emptiness in their mental continua. So the wisdom directly realizing emptiness is what we're aiming to generate through our study of this topic of the perfection of wisdom. But the hearers, those who are on the Hinayana path, as it's often called, or fundamental path, fundamental vehicle, individual vehicle, different names for that. These are one type of practitioner on that path that will achieve their own realization of emptiness along the way and attain the state of an Arya. Their final goal is to attain the state of an Arhat. This will come up in tonight's lecture as well, the term Arhat. It isn't on your screen, but essentially an Arya precedes becoming an Arhat. It's the direct realization of emptiness that occurs for those beings that then they cultivate until they have completely removed all of their own afflictive obstructions, everything that keeps them bound up in samsara. Solitary realizers are also practitioners of the Hinayana, the fundamental vehicle. They're called Pratyeka Buddhas, and they're not Buddhas, even though it says Buddha in the term. Buddha there is meaning realizer. And so a Pratyeka Buddha is a particular type of practitioner of the individual vehicle, the fundamental vehicle of the Hinayana. And what they do is essentially make prayers to be able to be reborn in their final lifetime before they attain that state of arhat in a realm where there are no Buddhas present, so that they can kind of teach beings in that realm through the force of their realizations. And I'm going to give little descriptions of those in a moment. Of course, the third one is bodhisattvas. That's what we're studying here, is those, and what we are aspiring to become are those beings who are together with the spontaneous mind of bodhicitta and who eventually realize emptiness directly. They become Aryas at that time. So again, not all hearers or solitary realizers or bodhisattvas are Aryas. It's only those who have the wisdom directly realizing in their realizing emptiness in their minds. So those who are hearers enter their path. They eventually realize emptiness directly, and then they eventually attain the state of an arhat. Those who are solitary realizers do the same. Is what the hearers do, essentially. And then bodhisattvas, they enter their path, the Mahayana path, with bodhicitta, and they essentially realize emptiness. They go on to remove not just the afflictive obscurations, but also the subtler obscurations, what are called the obscurations to omniscience, that keep them from becoming a Buddha. And of course, the Buddhas, the fourth one there, that's the goal. We often talk about Arya Buddhas as being those with just anybody who's a Buddha. We can call them an Arya Buddha. They have that realization of emptiness in their continuum. Absolutely. It's just so that you know that, we can refer to them as Aryas, but the other three are where we normally are talking about a demarcation on their path when they go from not having realized emptiness directly to having done so. So let's look at these two, just because these terms are going to come up again, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and it's good to introduce these for those of you who don't have familiarity with those terms. Hearers, literally hearer listeners, the Sanskrit Shravaka, are so called because they listen to teachings from others. And after attaining the fruit of their meditation, the enlightenment of a hearer, or we usually call it a liberation of a hearer, they cause others to hear about that attainment. They proclaim, I have done what was to be done. I will not know another birth. So these are beings called this because of this tendency they have to hear the Dharma and so on, and then, attaining that, cause others to hear about it. Having listened to the teachings and what have you, they then cause others to listen to their realizations, to hear their realizations. So the solitary realizers, as I mentioned, they're like hearers. They belong to the Hinayana, but they surpass hearers in terms of their cultivation of wisdom and merit, these two wings of the path as well, that they have to some degree, though they aren't going to full enlightenment, but they do have an accumulation of merit. They say it takes solitary realizers longer to achieve their state of arhatship, not because of their lacking any sharpness, but they rather have a need to go beyond somewhat the knowledge that the hearers have and generate more merit, more positive potential. And that's maybe enough to know about them, but it says they are able to generate the wisdom of a foe destroyer, which is the translation for arhat, A-R-H-A-T, arhat, during their final lifetime in cyclic existence without depending on another master's teaching. So again, they make these prayers to be able to have their final lifetime in samsara be in a realm where there aren't any masters that would be teaching them. Of course, they've received teachings in other lifetimes that have gotten them to that place. They arise during the time when there are no Buddhas or hearers in the world and actualize the enlightenment, or again, liberation of solitary realizers. Due to their former prayers, they are able to teach sentient beings by means of physical gestures, through demonstrations of miraculous powers and so forth, without using speech, because they do not wish to disturb their peace of mind with verbal communication. So they actually teach others through these miraculous powers and what have you. So there was one text that we studied in the Master's Program where they say sometimes they appear to have like burning fire on the top of their body while they have flowing water on the bottom of their body. So they kind of teach these miraculous things that cause people to gain some interest in the Dharma and in, attaining these same sorts of realizations. So those are the two types of Arya beings that you're not as familiar with, perhaps. Bodhisattvas, we all know from our study of the Mahayana path, and we're going to hear more and more about bodhisattvas some tonight as well. And of course, Buddhas, the state of having attained the goal of the bodhisattva. All right, so we are moving into this whole section where we have the actual sutra, and we went through again the title. Meaning of the title was last week, pages 10 and 11. Now we go on to the kind of towards the top of 11 yet to look at the meaning of the text. The meaning of the text is divided into two parts. A discussion of the prologue, which is where we're going to get to tonight, that produces the sutra. There's always a bit of a prologue in these sutras that indicates kind of where it happened and so on and what was going on. And then a discussion of the actual sutra that is produced from that prologue. And that will be, again, what we may get into a little bit tonight in terms of Shariputra's question and so on. Now, this isn't separate outlines that you see in the text, but nonetheless, we can divide up this discussion of the prologue into two parts. And you will see that, again, that there's a paragraph that pertains, several paragraphs that pertain to the common prologue on page 11 of your text. And then the unique prologue starts in the middle of page 12, and it's the latter part of this outline. So essentially the common prologue, and by common, we mean that it's shared with other sutras. So you will have this maybe idea repeated in a number of other sutras, especially the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, of which this is a part. From thus did I hear at one time, all the way through a great community of bodhisattvas. Then the unique or uncommon prologue, which is unique to this sutra, meaning that it is specifying some unique conditions that were occurring at that time, says at that time the Bhagavan was absorbed, came to see that those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So these sections of the sutra, actually I'm going to go ahead and pull that up as well. Just I may not pull that up as much tonight, but in the future I will be pulling this up to keep us grounded in it. There's a little outline that you should have that is out on the Dropbox page. That is something wonderful that my dear friend Emily put together when she taught this with color-coded boxes. So you have the prologue with the common prologue of the text there, the uncommon prologue, and then it goes into the actual sutra, and you see the actual sutra is divided here into how Shariputra asked his question, how Avalokiteshvara answered, and so on. And there'll be some of these little things off in the margin that I'll talk about when we get to those. But essentially tonight we're going to make it through this prologue. I'm determined to make it through that and hopefully even get into the actual sutra. I'm sorry, clicked on it too much there, in terms of how Shariputra asked his question. So these are the passages that we're talking about here in this first part, looking at the prologue. Let's go to the text first. I think it's going to be good to go through the text, and then we'll come back and we'll go through the slides. So here by text, actually I could have kept that up there, just clicked on a different tab, sorry. By the text again, I'm meaning that Tendar Larampa, the author of the commentary that we have that's called Jewel Light, Illuminating the Path, Illuminating the Meaning. This is the text that we're going to go into. So you can have it in front of you, but again, I'll be reading from this as we go through this together, and I will stop at certain parts and go to the slides. The first one, in terms of this common part, says with respect to the first, the common prologue is again from that beginning to that ending part of it. The purpose of the prologue is to have the listeners understand that the compiler, and again, we believe the compiler to be Ananda. Ananda was sort of the Buddha's right-hand person for a good part of his life, fairly younger than the Buddha and so on. We saw that in regard to some of the things we looked at, some debates about whether Ananda could have been the compiler of this sutra. But it seems to be, common agreement that he was there and did compile these teachings. So it says that we understand that the compiler listened without adding anything or subtracting anything, so that they can pay careful attention to him, to make sure that we know that this is the official stuff. This is, Ananda telling us what it is, what exactly transpired. According to the master Haribhadra, at one time means that by the blessings of the Buddha, all the words of the sutra were heard by Ananda in one instant. Remember how we had all of the three mothers of the perfection of wisdom all being said at the same time simultaneously. It seems that again, Haribhadra, who was a big proponent of Ananda having been there at these amazing teachings, said Ananda even heard it all in one instant. He says in his Abhisamaya Lamkara Loka, because an ear consciousness to which the entire meaning of the sutra arose in one instant. So he's referring to that compiler, Ananda, who was there and got the entire meaning of the sutra in that one instant. Again, whether this is how it happened or not is not as important as we have the conviction that this is a sutra of the Buddha that we can rely upon in terms of it being definitive meaning, like we discussed earlier, and so on. The Master Bhavaviveka asserts that because the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are not within the sphere of Shravakas, remember we just talked about them, hearers, their compiler is Vajrapani. That's because they often point to Ananda as having been in that class of practitioner, was a hearer, a disciple who was essentially not in the class of having greater intellect and an ability to hear the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras and make sense of them. So they give instead the role of compiler to Vajrapani. Vajrapani's name is going to come up a little bit later. He's essentially one of the 8 great bodhisattvas that was in the retinue of the Buddha during the time of the Buddha's living in this world. These were, most of them, if not all of them, were said to be actually Buddhas manifesting as bodhisattvas. But essentially they give this role to Vajrapani because Bhavaviveka doesn't think that Ananda could have been compiling it. Haribhadra asserts that although Ananda was not capable of doing so himself, he compiled the sutras through the blessing of the Buddha, and therefore is the compiler of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, not just the Heart Sutra that we are looking at here, but all of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Although such things should be explained, an explanation would be too lengthy, and I don't know what additional explanation would be needed, but nonetheless, I don't have anything more to say on that. So then we get into, that was essentially what is often called the excellent time. When we say at one time, we mean the excellent time when all these conditions came together for the Buddha to give this sutra, this Perfection of Wisdom discourse. And so essentially, that's the first of what are often called the 4 excellences, is the excellent time. The excellent teacher isn't mentioned here specifically, but it's the Buddha, of course, who is indirectly giving these teachings. Remember last week we looked at the idea, or was it 2 weeks ago, the 3 different types of speech of a Buddha. The Buddha speaks through his own words, where he essentially says something, which doesn't happen in this sutra until the very end, when he says that it is like that, it is like that, and so on. All those little words the Buddha gives at the end. The Buddha can also inspire others to speak and give teachings, which is mostly what happens in this sutra with Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. And then also there are words by the permission of the Buddha, which is this prologue. This prologue is all there through the permission of the Buddha, indicating the place and so on. So essentially we have the Buddha as the excellent teacher, which is the second of the excellences. The third excellence is the excellence of place. And we already talked a little bit about Vulture Peak, but let's go ahead and read what's here. It says, the reason for saying both Rajagriha and Vulture Peak, or Mass of Vultures Mountain is how it's worded in our sutra, our version of it, is for the sake of indicating the combination of the 2 places for laymen, which is Rajagriha, and those who have gone forth from the world, which is Vulture Peak, with the former being the best among places in the afflicted class, and the latter being the best of places among the pure class. So kind of delineating those two as, where the lay people who were, in an ideal place were, is in the Rajagriha, and they're going to explain what Rajagriha means and so on in a moment. And then Vulture Peak, where the actual sutra recitation was occurring, where the Buddha was in this sort of pure class, this place for pure beings to abide and hear these teachings. With regard to Rajagriha, which literally means the residence of the king, there was a famous place in the city of Kushinagara, that became uninhabitable due to being repeatedly burned down by non-humans. There were these malevolent forces that were causing fires to spontaneously start and burning down all of the various houses in that area. The king ordered, let me move up the screen a little bit here. The king ordered that henceforth those whose homes burned down must build their homes in the charnel ground of Sitavana and remain there. So he was kind of, giving a sort of punishment, I suppose, to some degree. Um, but just saying, they couldn't rebuild there. They had to, go to put their homes in the charnel ground, which doesn't sound like a very ideal place to be. At that time, by the power of karma, the king's own karma, his palace was the first to be lost in a fire. So because he had made that decree, the king then went there and made his abode. That's how it got the name Residence of the King. This is explained apparently in the Shalistambara Sutra. Regarding monk, now we're getting into the fourth excellence. The fourth excellence is the excellence of the retinue, the beings that were there with them. So we had the excellence of the time, of the teacher, of the place, and now we have the excellence of the retinue. And these are all going to come up in the slides. I'll go through, I think it's better to go through the commentary first, and then we go on to the slides. It'll sort of flesh things out with various quotes that I have there. Regarding monks, because we said again, there's a great community of monks, the actuality of monkhood can be attained by any of the 10 ways of receiving ordination. I'm not going to go into all those, but in this context, it refers to an arhat, not just a monk. Anyone who becomes an arhat, you automatically sort of become a monk. I mean, by virtue of you will be holding pure morality at that point. There will be nothing that would stop you. You don't have to necessarily take ordination vows. That attainment of arhatship, foe destroyer, the state of a foe destroyer, kind of makes you into a being that is at the same status as a monk, even beyond that, but anyway, it gives you that sort of monkhood, or I guess you'd also have nuns doing the same thing. As Shantideva says in the Bodhicharyavatara, monkhood is the root of the teaching, but even monkhood is difficult. I don't need to say much about some of these, I think. The Sangha is a gathering of 4 or more monks. And again, it's usually fully ordained monks, or I think it does include fully ordained nuns as well. But the etymology is that which has the aspiration not to be separated by demons from the teacher Buddha, the teaching of the excellent doctrine, and friends who practice purity. So in other words, not to be separated from the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma that is the teaching, and the Sangha, who are the friends who practice purity. So this gathering of monks that becomes a Sangha, the etymology of the words for it is that you have the aspiration not to be separated even by demons from the 3 jewels. Chandrakirti's 70 stanzas on refuge says, because they cannot be separated from the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha by billions of demons, it is clearly called Sangha. So just giving where this etymology of this word Sangha comes from. Again, this is not so essential information yet. We're still just kind of fleshing out who's all there, what's all going on. Regarding the word great, because we said a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas, it is explained many times in the Indian commentaries that it means a large number. I mean, it kind of makes sense when we say that, that a great community would be a large one. Bodhisattva is explained many times in such texts as the Varachana Abhisam Bodhi and the Sanchayagata Prajna Paramita Sutra. The simple etymology is that because they have purified all faults and accomplished all good qualities, they are Bodhi. And because they contemplate the welfare of all transmigrators and have annihilated demons, they are Sattva. And then there's another alternate thing, or because they have studied the 2 truths, which we're going to again talk about later, conventional truth and ultimate truth. They've studied those again and again and have arrived at the meaning of them. They are called Bodhi. And because they have endured hardship in contemplating the 2 truths again and again, they are called Sattva. So I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into the slides, but essentially we're going to go into the Tibetan for these as well. Bodhi is the same root as Buddha, and it just means awakening. And awakening essentially entails having done complete purification and having developed all of our qualities. and we'll see this Jangchup is the equivalent in the Tibetan, and it has both of those ideas. Sattva is usually translated as sempa, and it's Jangchop sempa is a bodhisattva, and it kind of means a heroic-minded one. Somebody who is very heroic in doing the work that needs to be done. Again, you'll see this coming up on the slides, but very similar in terms of meaning from the Sanskrit to the Tibetan. But there are times when they highlighted particular ideas in the Tibetan that aren't evident in the Sanskrit. So it says there then, regarding great, again, I'm not going to pronounce that one again. Regarding great, this sutra says, those who abide in the supreme Mahayana of the conqueror have great giving, great awareness, and great power. They wear great armor and have tamed the deceiving demons. Therefore, they are called Mahasattvas. So we have a very similar verse that I shared in last week's class that have to do with this idea of the Bhagavan and so on, and having developed these greatnesses, these great qualities. And so I'll touch on that when we get into the slides. But essentially, there are 6 greatnesses mentioned here. The first one is, I think, just again, the great practice of the Mahayana in general, and then great giving, great awareness, great power, great armor of patience and effort, and then the great taming powers that they have to overcome demons, and not demons always, beings outside of us, but the demons of the afflictions and so on. Therefore, they are called Mahasattvas. Bodhisattvas are those who are heroic beings intent upon enlightenment and achieving that purification and development of qualities. Mahasattvas are those who are great by virtue of the realizations that they possess. Generally, Mahasattva, according to Geshe Dakpa, is a term reserved for those who are on the grounds, meaning that they have realized emptiness and are proceeding towards enlightenment more definitely than those who precede that realization. And then the idea of them being together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas, it just doesn't mean that they're all there. It means that the behavior or the activity and means are, and it means essentially that they're concordant. So it means your behavior or activity is concordant. Everyone's abiding in concordant behavior and activity, kind of all there with the same posture, the same outlook on things, the same behavior in the midst of that. In brief, it means that the audience was of concordant activity. And then abide or dwell has 4 meanings: to abide in physical posture, to abide in teaching the doctrine, to abide in samadhi, meditative stabilization, and to abide in correctly residing within, which I didn't get any commentary on, so I can't tell you necessarily what that means, but it could probably mean, again, of within one's own realization or wisdom. I don't know that for sure, but in the case of this particular reference to abiding or dwelling there, this is a case of abiding in a physical posture, all of them abiding very respectfully in upright posture, listening to the teachings. So that's the information from our text in terms of the common prologue, kind of setting the scene with these various greatnesses in terms of the great time and so on, excellent time, excellent teacher, excellent place, excellent retinue. So these 4 excellences are, again, a key part of this, and you'll find these same sort of things in all the Prajnaparamita sutras. That's why it's called a common prologue, is that you get the excellent time of when this is actually occurring, and Ananda, or the compiler, being the witness to that the Buddha was there, the Bhagavan, was dwelling in a particular place that was, in this case, quite excellent because of all the qualities we looked at previously. I couldn't find out much more in terms of why these are, these indestructible Vajra places of Mass of Vultures Mountain, as well as Bodh Gaya. So I wasn't able to find anything more on that, but these very profound places where these sutras were set out, the Prajnaparamita. And then the excellent retinue, who was all there in the audience. I'm going to share, by the way, the 3 conditions are the last 3 according to His Holiness's book. Those of you who are reading his book, his teachings on the Heart Sutra, he says there are 3 conditions that make this into an excellent kind of situation. These excellent teacher, the excellent place, and the excellent retinue. what does it say for excellent time? In terms of the one commentary, again, that you have access to, that is the Chane Dragpa Shedrup, he says, these words, thus, these words is how he translated it, or thus, refer to the sutra that is about to be recited. So these words did I hear at one time, or thus did I hear at one time, is referring to what is going to follow. I heard, or did I hear, shows that the teaching was personally listened to, and that one did not hear it via a third person. So it wasn't that Ananda was, down the way and, somebody told him later about it. Ananda was there, or the compiler of these sutras was there, whoever that was, Vajrapani Ananda. In terms of at one time, this shows that while the Arhat reciting it had heard other teachings several times, maybe the Buddha talked about the Four Noble Truths on many, many occasions, this teaching he had heard only once. That it is difficult to receive this teaching. So when he's saying, thus did I hear at one time, it means, this is the one time I heard this. It also indicates sharp wisdom then, since the teaching was given only once. If it's given only once, it's like you get it that time or you don't get it. So it's kind of another quality that's pointing to in terms of this excellent time. There's also the idea, again, of this confluence of things coming together that make it possible for this teaching to occur. But again, we'll see some reference to that when we get into the uncommon prologue as well. Excellent teacher. I don't need to talk so much about the Bhagavan, because we looked at the female version of Bhagavan, Bhagavati, last week when we looked at the title. But essentially it means destroyer with qualities gone beyond. So destroyer is kind of, again, that part of it that is about destroying all the various factors that are opposed to attaining full enlightenment, and then qualities gone beyond, developing the other side of it. Again, a purification and a cultivation. These two things that are part of attaining Buddhahood, getting rid of everything that is antithetical to our enlightenment, all the obscurations, and then fully developing all the qualities that are resonant with that state of Buddhahood. So he says here, this can be related both to fortune and endowment, both the, kind of having fortune and endowment in terms of our abilities to practice and what have you. From the first point of view, destroyer with qualities means having destroyed afflictions as well as karma, and through that also birth, afflictive knowledge, and likewise other obscuring dharmas. That is why he is called destroyer with qualities gone beyond. So we can say from some point of view, to have destroyed means to have gotten rid of, again, karma and all the other factors that cause you to take rebirth, all the other afflictions that are in the mind, all other obscuring dharmas. That's the destroyer part of it. And then by virtue of that, you become endowed with qualities gone beyond. You would then have the other side of that title. From the second point of view, it is as it is said in the Sambudhi, which again is the same kind of reference to these same qualities, what again are we referred to as the six greatnesses: powerful and pure form, glory, renown, and transcendental wisdom, perfect enthusiasm. These six are called fortune. We saw this last week, right? And looking at that verse. So this is where we kind of can see from a second point of view that it's talking about having possessed all these particular qualities, these greatnesses. So he goes on then to say, the first point of view can also be related simply to destroyer, and the second to endowed with qualities. So again, whatever you're talking about, I'm just sharing this with you because I thought it was the most detailed explanation of the actual words in the common prologue. Essentially, we have this Bhagavan who has done both of these tests, who has completely destroyed everything that is opposing enlightenment, all of the karma, the delusions, even the subtler obscurations that we'll talk about later, and then endowed with qualities, having developed all the positive qualities that are in those sort of greatnesses of having great enthusiasm and what have you. In the word Bhagavan, gone beyond is not explicitly mentioned, but it is there in meaning and was added to exalt that he, the Buddha, is beyond the two extremes of existence, samsara, and peace, nirvana. Again, because the Buddha goes beyond both of those to stay engaged in the world, to attain this state that we call non-abiding nirvana. Has a completely pacified mind, without a doubt, but continues to be involved in existence, to not abide in that solitary peace that a hearer or a solitary realizer would when they attain the state of foe destroyer. And he is superior to worldly gods. By no means would a worldly god be comparable to the qualities of a Buddha. That he's gone beyond to a state that ordinary beings, certainly could never attain. All right, that's enough on excellent teacher, because we know who the Buddha is and what have you. Excellent place. We're not going to say a whole lot about this because we looked at Mass of Vultures Mountain in last week's class in the sort of preliminary introduction to this commentary. It's Rajagriha because that's the palace where the king lived. It's Vulture's Peak, Mass of Vultures Mountain in our text, because to the east there is a mountain that looks like the body of a vulture. Vulture's Peak Mountain, because at the top is the precious cave as the head of the vulture, and that is where he resided. So this particular commentary by Chonidrakpa Shedrup seems to be pointing to that being the shape of that cave was the vulture's head and so on. Remember how we had different explanations of why it's called Vulture's Peak or Mass of Vultures Mountain. It is said this mountain will not disintegrate even during the great fire at the end of the eon. And like I said earlier, completely indestructible. All right, excellent retinue. There's a bit more to say on this because it is important to kind of point out the meaning behind a lot of this, even beyond what Tendar Larampa had in his text. When we say the word great in a great community of monks, that's the first part of it, right? Together with a great community of monks, this means that they are not just fully ordained monks, but also arhats, as we saw in our commentary, meaning that they have completely eliminated the obscurations to liberation, or what are often called the afflictive obscurations. We did see those when we looked briefly at that chart of the path, and it showed in a little box what are the afflictive obscurations versus, or obscurations to liberation versus what are those to omniscience, or what are called often the knowledge obscurations, which are the subtler imprints that cause dualistic appearance and so on. But essentially, those who are in the audience here as a great community of monks are arhats. They've attained that state of a foe destroyer, completely removing all the obscurations to liberation. According to Geshe Dakpa, who was the resident Geshe out in San Francisco at Sechen for quite a number of years, the number of monks was 1,250, which we actually do see in some sutras. In the Vajrakutter Sutra, it says it was 1,250 bhikshus, monks. And of these, Geshe Dakpa says 1,249 were arhats, and the one remaining, Ananda himself, was not. Remember how there was that debate about Ananda and whether he was there and what have you, but apparently he didn't attain arhatship. I looked on the internet and it says not until after the Buddha passed at one of the first councils that occurred after the Buddha's passing away, his parinirvana. And so Ananda himself apparently was not. Nonetheless, you're going to see a passage later where they refer to the compiler as being an arhat. And so it's hard to say. They often talk about how these beings who appeared in the retinue of the Buddha, just like those bodhisattvas I mentioned earlier, are actually enlightened beings. And they're just appearing in this way to be ordinary, to facilitate this whole process. But Ananda himself apparently was not one of these who were an arhat. So he's a great community amongst means 1,249 arhats and one non-arhat. Well, anyway. So we said then a great community of bodhisattvas. I'm going to give you again a little bit more of the Tibetan bodhisattva, just so you're familiar with this. I think it is good. This is the language that all of our commentaries and things come in this tradition. And the terms, again, when they came from the Sanskrit into the Tibetan, they often would take a single idea that's in the Sanskrit and delineate it more in terms of the Tibetan words. So what you have in the italics there that isn't boldface is the wily, which again is a way of indicating what particular Tibetan letters are being used. And then Jongchop Sempa is the pronunciation of that. Jong means the qualities of abandonment. Again, the complete purification of all faults and limitations. This is what we are aiming for as a bodhisattva. When we say bodhi in the Sanskrit, it means having first the qualities of abandonment, completely abandoning all faults, and chup, the qualities of attainment, perfecting all understanding, good qualities and insights. Now, when we get to the state of Buddhahood, we recited that word at the beginning of class tonight, right? Sangye. It's a similar idea. Sang means to fully purify and have done that work, and ge means to have fully developed or cultivated all the qualities. So here, it's like the idea that we're aiming towards having all of these qualities of abandonment and qualities of attainment, but we haven't yet attained them yet. Jangchup is the enlightenment that we are trying to attain. When we get to Sangye, then it is fully accomplished. And of course, when we use Jangchup to simply refer to enlightenment rather than Jangchup Sempa to refer to a bodhisattva, then in that state we would have attained the complete abandonment and the complete attainment of all qualities. Together, Jangchup then refers to enlightenment, to bodhi. Sempa, again, has the connotation of it being a hero or a heroic-minded one. Because hero, maybe, again, I should have put hero, heroine, heroic-minded one, whatever. The idea is that this is a person, a being who has this very heroic mind, who is intent upon enlightenment. A bodhisattva, this is from Geshe Sonam Rinpoche's book, again and again takes to mind the welfare of living beings and has the heroic ability to overcome interferences and everything hostile. In the term Jangchup, enlightenment, the first syllable Jang refers to overcoming and elimination of all obstructive forces. The second syllable Chup, he uses a B there instead of a P. Again, there's debate on those in terms of what sounds are actually being signified by the Tibetan. That signifies the realization of full knowledge, again, the complete development of the qualities. The second part of the name, Sempa, or heroic being, refers to the bodhisattva's quality of great compassion. What makes someone heroic is that they're motivated by this great compassion not just being ordinary compassion, but the intention, strong intention, to free all sentient beings from suffering. So it is said that bodhisattvas are beings who, out of intense compassion, never shift their attention away from sentient beings. They are perpetually concerned for the welfare of all beings, and they dedicate themselves entirely to securing that welfare. Again, most of us know who bodhisattvas are, but I gave you a little description of the hearers and the solitary realizers, so I thought I would share this bit from Geshe Sonam Rinpoche, as well as this from His Holiness. A great assembly in this case refers again to a large number, and in the case of the bodhisattvas mentioned, they are moreover endowed with 6 kinds of greatness. Remember that little quote that we looked at in our commentary that had these 6 indicated. 1, greatly giving. They are greatly generous in that they are willing to give away their body, their possessions, and virtue. They gladly give to those in need and enjoy the immediate pleasure of having satisfied another's wishes, as well as the long-term benefits that result from generosity. So bodhisattvas generate great joy being asked to give, whatever it is that is being asked for. They are happy to give. They are greatly intelligent, being capable of comprehending the intricacies of conventional phenomena and of understanding the fundamental nature of things, conventional and ultimate truths. So they have great wisdom, great insight, great intelligence to be able to discern those. They are greatly powerful with the capacity to overcome everything inimical, everything that is contrary, that opposes their development and so on. So they have great power to overcome all those harmful factors. They are greatly engaged in Mahayana practices. And again, in our little, that poem or the verse that we saw on page 12, like I said, I think that's in the first line, those who abide in the supreme Mahayana of the conquerors, those who are greatly engaged in Mahayana practices, which consists of taking responsibility for others' well-being, in contrast to Hinayana practices, where the focus is limited to responsibility for oneself and one's own liberation. Again, those hearers and solitary realizers I mentioned earlier are in that category of Hinayanists who, although it's not that they don't have compassion for others or concern for them, their main focus is their own liberation. So they don't engage in the wealth of practices that the bodhisattvas do, the Mahayana. The 5th, they are greatly armored. In our verse, it was they wear great armor, armored with patience and enthusiastic effort. When harmed, they do not think of retaliating, but instead feel even stronger compassion and the wish to ensure the happiness of the one who has harmed them. Totally opposed to perhaps how we deal with those who harm us. They are great tamers of all destructive forces, which again, in our text, it said they've tamed the deceiving demons. So all destructive forces, everything again that opposes their forward progress in terms of their spiritual development, they are capable of taming. Although the only, and this is a final little bit that has to do with kind of who else might be in the retinue, although the only members of the audience that are specifically mentioned in the text are the communities of monks and bodhisattvas, it should be understood that a far wider variety of beings were in fact present. Now again, we saw the little picture of what it looked like up on Vulture's Peak. You might wonder where all those beings would fit. But again, a lot of them were in space. They weren't needing to be on the ground, especially what we look at in this next slide. From this world, there would have been Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and many men and women who had taken the Buddhist lay precepts, but numerous beings from worlds other than our own also would have been present. Okay, so again, they say some of these beings, even some other bodhisattvas from other realms, might appear in the sky. Remember, we said that was another reason why it was called Vulture's Peak. They might have appeared as vultures, what have you. Now, there is a fifth excellence that Geshe Dakpa adds, which is essentially the excellent subject matter of this text. So to the four excellences mentioned earlier, there's added a fifth. This is the excellence of the subject, which is the subject matter of the text, which is mostly, again, the teachings on emptiness. But that isn't all that is communicated in this text, as we're going to see as we continue going through it. This excellent subject matter is the remainder of the sutra. And then His Holiness, again, you've probably been reading his commentary. On one hand, he says there is the explicit subject matter, which is the Buddha's teaching on emptiness, right? That's why we primarily study this, is to kind of get our heads around this idea of lacking inherent existence, what emptiness really means, the teachings on that, and so on. On the other hand, there is the hidden subject matter, which relates to the stages of the path associated with the deepening levels of understanding of emptiness. By stages of the path, we aren't talking about the Lam Rim that we talked about in the first class. We're talking about the progression through the 5 paths and the grounds and so on that have to do with our developing a deeper and deeper awareness of the topic of emptiness. And it's kind of pointing to the more conventional development of the Bodhisattva as opposed to what is realized, the wisdom of emptiness, that is the main thing that allows the Bodhisattva to progress along this path. But nonetheless, it's implicitly teaching the path. And he goes on to say, His Holiness talks about this a little bit more, the perfection of wisdom scriptures explicitly present the teachings of emptiness in great detail through enumeration of various categories of phenomena, both impure, such as the 5 aggregates, form, feeling, and so on, and pure, such as the 4 noble truths, no suffering, nor source of suffering, and so on. All of these various things that are set out in the Heart Sutra. And the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra scriptures do that. They explicitly teach emptiness. This is empty, that is empty, and so on. At the same time, these scriptures implicitly present the stages of the path to enlightenment in terms of progressive levels of insight into emptiness. Again, that happened through these 5 paths and the grounds that are together with them. Okay, so now we have the uncommon or unique prologue. This is again from where it says, at that time the Bhagavan was absorbed and so on, and then talks about Avalokiteshvara and says that he beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So let's go back to the text and go through. There's not, again, quite as much for that, just this larger paragraph that is on page 13. Whoops, how did I do that? That's a problem with these PDF files compared to some of the others. Actually, I guess there's 2 paragraphs. Okay. The unique prologue, again, is just what I said, that particular passage. Also at the, no, that's part of it too. Okay, so go down about 5 lines. The difference between the common and the unique prologue is that the common is shared with other sutras, whereas the unique prologue is found in this sutra and not in others. Again, we mentioned that earlier. At that time means at the time of teaching the doctrine, when the roots of virtue of the audience had ripened. As I said, there's implicit in this idea of the timing when we get to this uncommon prologue, that this is like a confluence of all these things coming together, of just the right audience being there and the Bhagavan being there and Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra and all of this unfolding, because it's the perfect time for this teaching to take place. Regarding the profound, or the perception of the profound, what we call in our text a profound, I think it is profound perception. It is that which is difficult to appear to the mind. What is difficult to appear to the mind? Emptiness. The wisdom realizing emptiness is very hard to cultivate. He goes on to give an example. It is not difficult to perceive the reflection of sun or moon in a lake, but it is difficult for the limits of space to appear on the surface of the lake, right? So you might see the sun or the moon reflected on the water, but could you get all of space to appear in the water, to be able to look at just the surface of a lake and see all of space? In the same way, it is easy to perceive the conventional, but it is difficult to perceive the ultimate. Again, these ideas of conventional and ultimate truths, the two truths as they're called, we'll be touching on them here and there, and we'll get into them in more depth when we get to the statements that Avalokiteshvara makes around form is empty, emptiness is form, and so on. Perception means the wisdom that understands something so profound. So when we say profound perception, it indicates in this context the profound, that which is being realized, the object, which is difficult to discern, and the perception, that is knowing that is the wisdom that is understanding that profundity. So it's got both the subjective awareness as well as the object being known implicit within that term of profound perception. So this is what the Buddha is engaged in, is in profound perception. The categories of phenomena are the aggregates, constituents, sources, and so forth. Right? Again, the categories of meditation on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Categories of phenomena, these are what we're going to see delineated in that whole section when Avalokiteshvara says there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, and so on. That's the aggregates. And then we go on to the sources and the constituents. We go through all the various levels and categories of phenomena to discern that all of them lack inherent existence. They are all empty. Well, the Buddha is sitting in this meditative state, realizing all of this without a doubt, knowing the complete emptiness of all of these categories of phenomena. Also at that time, which is how the second part of this starts in terms of Avalokiteshvara, is a term of emphasis, meaning at that very time at which the disciples continue were ripe, at that very time when all this came together, this confluence, the Avalokiteshvara was there as well. So regarding Arya Avalokiteshvara, or the superior Avalokiteshvara, he who has risen far above the level of common beings has the power to free from suffering all sentient beings who can be seen by his eyes. This is talking to some of the, what Avalokiteshvara means, Lokeshvara being this ability to see the suffering of others and so on. We'll get into that when we get into the slides, but essentially this is this being who is present there, who is going to give most of the sutra through the power of the Buddha, this whole discourse on the wisdom realizing emptiness. And we'll talk a little bit more about who he is and His Holiness's words about him. The practice of the profound means that he also was observing emptiness. Observing it means contemplating it, you know. So this, at the time when the Buddha is in this concentration called profound perception, Avalokiteshvara is also directly realizing emptiness, you know, in that state. And particular, he is seeing these five aggregates also as empty of inherent existence. It means that he saw not only the aggregates, but also these other phenomena, these other categories of phenomena. What you'll come to learn are the sources, the constituents, and so on. Again, I don't need to talk about them tonight because they're coming up in Avalokiteshvara's statements. He saw all of these as being empty of inherent existence. This last little bit, this last sentence, I'm not going to go into it because, again, it has to do with the Tibetan, because sometimes when these things came in from the Sanskrit into Tibetan, there were errors made in the text. And so these are corrections being made by these commentators. Okay. So that's all that our commentary says about this. Let's go to what I want to share with all of you about the uncommon prologue. The first part is really looking at, again, the Buddha Bhagavan. What was he up to? You know, what was he doing? At that time, he was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. The words on that occasion or at that time are not simply a casual reference to the time when this teaching was given. It means an auspicious confluence of events, a point in time when everyone's positive energy, their merit, ripened, and they became fully prepared to receive this teaching. Kind of like a magical moment, when all of that is coming together, the harmonic convergence or whatever that was, happening on a Buddha plane. This is from, again, a free text that you can download from Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives. If it's not free, it'll definitely be there for a very minimal charge. Profound refers to profound emptiness, and appearance, or perception in our text, here refers to the wisdom that perceives emptiness. So as I said, the object being known as well as the subjective awareness. Therefore, Buddha was involved in single-pointed concentration on the ultimate nature of reality, emptiness, which was free from both coarse and subtle forms of laxity, which is one of the factors that keeps one from having that perfect concentration, as well as excitement, the distraction that kind of takes us out of that meditation. So the Buddha's mind is always in perfect concentration because the Buddha has developed that quality to perfection. More specifically, however, profound appearance has a twofold connotation. Here I'm going into Geshe Rabtin's commentary on this. It actually indicates also the two truths, ultimate and conventional, and the relationship between them. Profound refers to the ultimate truth of voidness. The first, well, it's often the second of the two truths. We often talk about conventional and ultimate. But this is the main topic of this text, is the ultimate truth of voidness, which, as we shall see later, is defined as the mere absence of inherent existence. Appearance or perception actually refers to the conventional truths that appear to us and perform functions, although their ultimate nature is one of voidness of any inherent existence. They lack any inherent existence, but they still function. They appear. I'll get into a deeper description of the two truths a little bit later, but I found this interesting that Geshe Rabtin points to this idea of profound perception or profound appearance, having that connotation of both of the truths. These two truths should also be understood in relation to wisdom and method, the two aspects of the path to Buddhahood. Wisdom is developed primarily through gaining insight into ultimate truth, whereas method is cultivated in the context of conventional truth. Okay, because that's where we're involved in compassionate action and so on, generosity, all these other things that are going on. That's our method side in the conventional world, whereas our ultimate wisdom is developed when we are meditating on emptiness. Generally, the Buddha Bhagavan remains in meditative equipoise, as I mentioned earlier, always in single-pointed concentration, but remains in this particular meditative equipoise on suchness or emptiness without arising from it. The Buddha always has that awareness of emptiness. But the Buddha also has the ability to know conventional things. This is what distinguishes a Buddha from a bodhisattva who's realized emptiness directly. That's the final obstacle that those bodhisattvas remove. The obstacles or obscurations to omniscience are those barriers that keep one from having this complete knowledge of all phenomena, this omniscience that knows both ultimate truth, suchness or emptiness, and conventional truth, everything else that is a dependent arising, arising from causes and conditions and so on. So the Buddha Bhagavan is always in that state without needing to arise from it. And so the Buddha didn't enter the concentration called profound appearance or profound perception newly. This does not preclude, however, showing the appearance of entering this meditative equipoise. Everything a Buddha does is an appearance in line with the disciples who are there. So all these people there, Ananda or whoever, who was compiling, saw the Buddha enter into this meditative equipoise on emptiness. But it doesn't mean the Buddha was without that meditated equipoise on emptiness before he entered into it, because he's always in that state. Again, kind of an interesting little thing to be aware of or be aware of in terms of Buddhas and what their knowledge is like. Okay, now we have the second part, and then after this we'll have a short break. The Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara. What is he up to? What is he doing? First of all, to let you know that Avalokiteshvara, as I said earlier, he was among the 8 bodhisattvas in the close entourage of Shakyamuni Buddha. And again, I believe from what I've heard and my recollection is that all of these were Buddhas appearing to be perfect bodhisattvas. But the first three, Manjushri, Vajrapani, and Avalokiteshvara, these are said to signify the three main qualities of the state of enlightenment: wisdom in Manjushri, power of Vajrapani, and then Avalokiteshvara signifies compassion. Even though this is a text on wisdom, you might think, well, why wasn't Manjushri saying it? It's kind of interesting. They chose Avalokiteshvara as the person to do this. Maybe, again, that union of compassion and wisdom to be able to be firmly rooted in the compassionate wish to benefit others, but to or have that wisdom arise within the sphere of that. And then the other one, Siddhigarbha, Savana, Varana, Vishkambin, Akashagarbha, Maitreya, Samantabhadra. Some of these names you may have heard, but essentially these were the 8 great bodhisattvas. So Avalokiteshvara, this is one little photo that's more like in the human form with 2 arms. He does have a second leg, it's just his leg is pulled up. So it's not that he's one-legged and 2-armed. This is just one, he's always holding a lotus. Again, that lotus is significant in terms of signifying his immense compassion. Here, the specific bodhisattva mentioned is Avalokiteshvara, known in Tibetan as Chenrezig. The meaning of the name Chenrezig indicates a bodhisattva who, out of great compassion, never shifts his attention away from sentient beings, always gazing at them with a sense of deep concern. Again, there are many stories I could tell about Avalokiteshvara, but I'm going to let it go for now. He's also called Lokeshvara, which is a shortening of that name, which literally means the accomplished master of the world. In the context of the Heart Sutra, Avalokiteshvara appears in the form of a bodhisattva on the 10th bodhisattva level, or bhumi, or ground, as it's usually translated. So although he's a Buddha, he's appearing to be this very high-level bodhisattva who embodies this being the accomplished master of the world, who is looking out on the world with eyes of compassion, always wanting to come to the aid of beings. In that uncommon prologue, the word also indicates that not only the Buddha entered meditative equipoise on the concentration profound appearance, but also Avalokiteshvara was in that same meditation. Bodhisattva, because at that time he aspired to the enlightenment of a Buddha to fulfill his own purpose. We have both purposes, the purpose of fulfilling the purpose of others and of filling oneself. We aspire to enlightenment, that's the goal that will fulfill our own purpose. And a mahasattva, meaning a great-minded one, a high-level bodhisattva, because you want to attain that enlightenment for the purpose of others. So your own purpose is satisfied by your attainment of enlightenment, but then others' purpose is satisfied because then in that state you can be fully dedicated to their welfare. Again, we talked about the term Arya, or superior. When we say Arya Avalokiteshvara, that's because they've gone beyond the level of an ordinary being, and because he's gone far beyond non-virtue. Avalokita, the literal meaning is to look upon. He's called Avalokiteshvara because he views the 5 types of migrators at all 6 times with compassion. The 6 times are just one way of referring to the entire day. Lord, the literal meaning of Ishvara, that's included in Avalokiteshvara, is Lord, meaning being rich in good qualities or power. Why? Because he's the Lord of Dharma. Again, just giving you more to flesh out the meaning of these names and so on. And then it's saying, the very profound practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, meaning singularly, it's similar to the Buddha, the very same practice that the Buddha was engaged in, the very same object the Buddha was realizing. He looked with wisdom only at the profound practice of the perfection of wisdom. This is what Avalokiteshvara is up to. And he views with wisdom also the 5 aggregates of form and so forth as empty of inherent nature or inherent existence. And again, the word also, as is pointed out by Geshe Sonam Rinchen, means that he saw that the 5 aggregates too are empty of any inherent nature, so that they, not only they exist in this way as empty, but also the sources, the constituents, or what we sometimes call elements. As I said, I'll explain what those are in the future, but essentially all these various categories of phenomena. And the 5 aggregates, we're going to talk about them more in when we get into Avalokiteshvara's words, but they are the 5 following, form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. And I'll give a deeper description of those when we continue. So, sorry, I went a little bit past our break. It's 8:20. Let's take a 10-minute break till 8:30, and then we'll reconvene and do a little Q&A and see where people are at. And if people don't have questions, I'll do a little bit more material. I know it's a lot, and I appreciate people hanging in there through this longer period of a lecture. So, all right, so take your 10 minutes, take a stretch, and I'll see you soon. And everybody magically appears again. So, all right. So let's just open it up to questions. And yeah, if you just if you want to put your hand up, that's fine. That little icon that shows that your hand is up, but you don't necessarily have to. If your video is on, you can raise your hand and I'll see it. Otherwise, you can just unmute your mic and ask a question. Are there any questions from tonight or anything we've talked about in the course so far? I see a cat tail by David, but that's not a hand. Does your cat have a question? Anyway, anyone?
Don?
Yes, John.
Yep.
Hi. Hi, John.
Don, I was just wondering, the bodhisattvas, like, for example, Avalokiteshvara,
Mhm.
what do I understand? Are they persons, human beings born on Earth that have a history, or where do they come from?
That gets to be a pretty tricky question because, again, when we think about, there was one bit that I read on the internet on these 8 bodhisattvas when I was preparing for tonight's lecture that essentially says that they are each of these 8 sort of manifestations of different qualities of the Buddhas. And so in a sense, we can say that whatever we refer to as enlightened mind, which again, we can't, His Holiness always emphasizes that we have to say that there are individual minds that all become enlightened. But once you become a Buddha, part of like the Buddha network, well, then there's really nothing to distinguish you from other beings other than the past karma that you had as a sentient being before you became a Buddha. So in that sense, we could say that you sort of join this force in the world that is manifesting in a variety of ways. So whether these 8 bodhisattvas, including Avalokiteshvara, were individual mind streams that are now manifesting in a particular Buddha mode, or whether they're simply part of a conglomerate of Buddha energy, enlightened mind that is manifesting in this way, I can't really say, but I think it speaks to the same thing, that these are, when we attain Buddhahood. In fact, one thing I might share on this that I found really quite interesting, it's in the book that's called Path to Bliss that His Holiness wrote on the Lam Rim. He says that sometimes people may wonder, well, why do I need to become a Buddha if there's all this force of enlightened minds they're all out there trying to enlighten all beings and doing whatever? What difference would it make if I became a Buddha? And what he emphasized, which I do hear from other teachers as well, is that when you become a Buddha, due to that past karma that you had before you became a Buddha, you will have a greater ability to help some beings that may not have connections to other Buddhas in a more direct way. That although we're all connected through lifetimes and lifetimes, as we know from our studies and looking at everyone having been our mother and all these kinds of ideas, the beings that you are quite close to in this life and in the lifetimes just before you become enlightened seem to have greater potential to benefit from your enlightenment. Why? Because you're karmically hooked with them. It kind of makes sense. Again, when you look at the Buddha himself manifesting in this enlightened form in India, all the beings he was quite close to, his family members, the people there in India at the time, he had some karma with them, and they were all able to benefit from those teachings to a much greater degree. Whereas people in other parts of the world at that time, didn't have that karma, didn't have that ability. So I don't know. I mean, we do talk about these beings as having stories, like the story of Avalokiteshvara and so on, and then Tara being born from a tear of Avalokiteshvara, and all these various mythologies that are out there. But I think it's good that we don't concretize them too much. They're stories that do speak to certain things, like with Tara, there's the idea that she was a princess who decided she was going to become enlightened in female form. And of course, when we look at Buddhism and the patriarchal element, elements of it, we see mostly male forms of Buddhas. And so she made that determination. So it's always really hard to tell, where, when we see a particular manifestation of a Buddha, is it grounded in a historical story of a particular person and what exactly happened with them, or whether it's just manifestations in various ways of this enlightened mind that are there to teach certain lessons and to help us to, awaken our compassion. The one story about Avalokiteshvara is that his guru was Amitabha, and he made this vow to his guru that he would enlighten all beings, bring them all out of suffering and so on, or else if he didn't, let his body be broken into 1,000 pieces. And so he spent one day kind of emptying out the hell realms, getting all these beings sort of out of there through his influence on them and their good karma and whatever. And then he turned around the next day and he looked, and it was filled up again. And he thought, oh, this is an impossible task. I can never get all the beings out of samsara. And so he broke his vow to his guru, and he broke into 1,000 pieces. And the story is that when Amitabha put him back together, he made him into 1,000-arm Chenrezig, or 1,000-arm Avalokiteshvara, where he's got 1,000 hands and arms, each with an eye in the palm of them, so that he can see the suffering of the world and immediately react. He becomes more powerful almost through breaking his vow, which is kind of an interesting thing. He got to that place where he recognized that the work is going to take as long as the work needs to take, and you just have to keep becoming more capable, which his guru allowed him to do through manifesting in that form. So there's a lot of these that are obviously a bit more mythological, but they are there for a lesson. They're there for a reason to speak to these. I don't know if that helps, John, but
No, that's good. Thanks, Don.
yeah. One really interesting book on these beings, you may already have read it, but it's called Images of Enlightenment. John Landau wrote the text, a longtime student of Lama Yeshe's and Lama Zopa's, and Andy Weber did the illustrations, and really quite nice. Goes into these Buddha figures and talks about them. And again, there are stories around many of them, but whether the stories are meant to be taken literally or not, it's always kind of hard to tell. There is a comment in the from David Lee. Bob passed it on. We come across terms such as wisdom and compassion, wisdom and bliss, love and compassion, knowledge and empathy. Are they all interchangeable? For example, does wisdom equal love, compassion equal bliss? No, I think we have to identify them as being, somewhat distinct. Now, again, in the mind of a Buddha, these qualities all become, almost simultaneously there. This is one of the things when we talk about the state of Buddhahood, this idea of the two truths, of kind of the wisdom side of it, and then the more compassionate wing, that would include love, would include, even in the tantric path, it includes the blissful states that are induced that go together with that wisdom. All of these kinds of conventional things and the wisdom realizing emptiness are united in a Buddha's mind. There's nothing, in a sense, to differentiate them, because the Buddha, although, we can't say the Buddha doesn't have any discrimination. There's discrimination, but there's no need to, because the Buddha's this one singularity of an omniscient mind that is knowing all phenomena at all times, which is pretty unfathomable for us, right? We hear something like this and we think it's just, what are they talking about? How could you possibly attain such a state? But that's because of our own limitations. We can't really think beyond that. But a Buddha's mind has no limitations. All the boundaries are broken. There's nothing limiting a Buddha's knowledge. So for a Buddha, these things kind of become fully united. But when we talk about them on the path, they are two separate wings that do influence each other. And when you get into the tantric teachings, you actually do try very much to practice them kind of in a single moment of mind, to try to create that Buddha mind in your tantric experience. This is why we talk about in that tantric path the union of bliss and emptiness, or bliss and wisdom, is because we want to bring kind of that element of the conventional side of it together with the ultimate as a very powerful vehicle for awakening more quickly, which is what the tantric path is all about. So we can become of benefit to others sooner, rather than waiting until eons and eons later when we become a Buddha. So I wouldn't necessarily interchange all of these. And when we talk about that kind of method side, it includes compassion, it includes love. As I said, in the tantric path, it includes bliss. I mean, everything on that side, and empathy would be, again, a source for many of those other qualities. So we can identify unique qualities that are all a part of what we frequently call the method side of the path. And then the wisdom, which is the deeper wisdom and the insight into reality, but we can also include some of our other wisdom, the wisdom that knows the workings of karma, the wisdom that knows the reality of rebirth, and so on. Those sort of conventional wisdoms do support the deeper development of wisdom, but we're primarily talking about the wisdom realizing emptiness. So when we unite that wisdom with all of these method qualities that are all about our interactions in the conventional world with other beings, then we have both causes for developing ourselves into Buddhahood. The wisdom develops into what's called the truth body, the Dharmakaya, and the compassionate method and all the things that feed that ripen into what are called the Rupakaya, the form bodies. Upon attaining enlightenment, you will achieve your purpose by having your mind completely developed in the state of Buddhahood. That's your own purpose. And then you will be able to achieve the purpose of others by that wisdom mind being able to manifest in forms to help other beings. So the Rupakayas, that's what we were talking about to John's question. This is kind of how we can see some of these beings of Avalokiteshvara or Tara or Manjushri or whoever, is that they are the ways that this Buddha mind is able to benefit other beings. Because Buddhists, if they were just an enlightened mind, they wouldn't be able to do much to help us, right? How does that mind communicate to us or interact with us? We need form. We need a way to be able to interact with others. So a Buddha has culminated both of those wings into these two states that are there simultaneously. And again, a Buddha doesn't even use any sort of conceptual mind to say, well, what should I do today? It might be a good time to go down and help Don. Don might need some help. A Buddha is rather like the sun shining in the sky. And it's always there sending out rays. Whether beings experience those rays is up to their own individual karma or position. Are they out in the sun? Are they in the cave? Are they, midway between? Each of us have our own karma that we've created that allows those rays of light that are the Buddha's enlightened activities into our lives in certain ways. And again, they might be in human form, they might be in animal form, they might be in non-material form, or I'm sorry, material form, non-human form. They might be in the form of Buddhas. It said Lama Tsongkhapa had this vision of his guru appearing as Manjushri, this Buddha image of with the flaming sword and the, holding the Prajnaparamita text on a lotus or whatever. And he received teachings from that form of a being, of a Buddha. So again, I wouldn't necessarily equate those two. They do have kind of a parallel track. And in Tantra, we very much try to keep bringing them together into a single state of mind, because that's what the resultant state is like. The state of Buddhahood, those two minds are absolutely fused together. We might, again, from our vantage point, be able to say, oh, we're going to talk about the wisdom of a Buddha, or we're going to talk about the compassion of a Buddha. But for the Buddha, it's all part and parcel of omniscient mind. There's no kind of real differentiation of those qualities, because it's not like one gets weaker, one gets stronger. They're there in their full strength all the time. I don't know if that helps, David. There's David still here. Okay, good. Anyone else have any questions before we, anything? No other questions?
Hello, Don. Hello again, Don. This is
Oh,
Dawn.
oh, hi, Don.
Hi. So, what you were talking about, when you're talking about the conventional and the ultimate truth, and the fact that we're continuing to try to, well, from what I'm understanding is in the conventional truth, we're really, as we investigate our mind and see our delusions, and I mean, are we able to do those things by, obviously, by studying the teachings and meditation? And is ultimate truth referring to these teachings that we're studying, and is it referring to any kind of or is it the realizations? Like,
Mm.
as we study, I don't know that, I mean, at some point you have a realization if you're on this path long enough, right? So is that is that what ultimate truth is referring to, or is it also referring to the teachings that we're studying?
So I'm gonna. That's a very good question, Don. I'm gonna try to address it as quickly as I can, simply because it's a very involved topic to look at the two truths, and I will be talking about it a little bit later. Again, when we get to that passage from Avalokiteshvara, where he says, "Form is empty, emptiness is form." When we talk about the two truths, they are first of all a dichotomy, meaning that anything that exists, and they do encompass all things that exist, anything that exists is either a conventional truth or an ultimate truth. And when we talk about these, we can say that they are in, uh, what's the word, inexplicably bound up with each other, or inextricably, that's the word, sorry, inextricably bound up with each other. So let's talk about any particular phenomenon. Let's talk about this little wrist mala that I sometimes am playing with when I'm talking. I hope you don't hear it too much. Anyway, this little wrist mala, this is its conventional nature, is that this is what we call a wrist mala. We give it that label. It's this collection of parts and so on, and we conventionally agree we're going to call this wrist mala. It coexists with the emptiness of wrist mala, which is its ultimate nature. Everything that exists, whether it be you, me, a computer, a tree, a dog, whatever, all these phenomena that exist together with their emptiness. This is the nature of the two truths, is that they are kind of the same entity, but we think about them as two different aspects. One is the conventional way that things are appearing to us, as a tree or a dog or a computer or whatever. The other is when we do the deeper investigation into how they exist, to see their emptiness. So when we talk about these two truths, we're talking about objects. Now, again, subjects, or the minds that know these things, would be included in them because they are phenomena as well. They exist as well, but they would always be on the side of the conventional. Anything that is a wisdom, a mind, would be a conventional phenomenon. The emptiness of that would be its ultimate truth. So this is how the two truths are positive, is that the first truth, the conventional truth, are simply everything that we establish as existing, which, as we're going to see when we do our investigation into this, is simply through designation. You know, that, as I was saying when I was holding this up, this isn't a real mala or real wrist mala. It's actually what we label as a mala. This is the basis for a mala. We give a label of it, you know, to it, which is wrist mala. That's the only way that conventional things exist, is through mere designation in the end. They also depend upon their parts and their causes and conditions, but all of those point to that lack of any inherent existence. There's nothing from the side of what's in my hand that makes it a wrist mala. It's simply a label that I give to that. So those who have realized emptiness come around to understand how conventional truths actually exist in this very subtle way. But everything that exists, again, be it wrist mala or computer or dog or person, whatever, all of these exist together with their emptiness, because that's the only way things can exist, is lacking any inherent existence. So your question about, are we talking about the wisdom that realizes that? From our vantage point, yes, we want to realize that ultimate truth. But ultimate truth isn't our wisdom. Ultimate truth is the object that we know through our wisdom. So that's why we say the wisdom of emptiness, the wisdom knowing ultimate truth. And as I said, when we understand that ultimate truth, then we also get the very subtle way that conventional truths exist. Because right now, all the things that we think of as conventional truths, we don't think of them as empty of inherent existence, you know, without some training in this philosophy, and they appear to us as if they exist on their own independently. And this is what we're going to examine when we get into these, what Avalokiteshvara starts pointing to all these various things and saying, in emptiness, there are none of these things. None of these things really exist in emptiness because they appear very differently than how they actually exist. They don't exist on their own in that real way that they seem to. So I don't know if that helped, but essentially, you know, this is the purpose for studying these kinds of things, is to become aware that the way we've been relating to the conventional world is through this falseness, through this ignorance. And we have to realize emptiness to come to see how the world actually exists in a very, very slight way. You know, mere imputation, merely imputed. But that emptiness, again, is the object of the wisdom realizing emptiness, which is what we were talking about, that those Arya beings gain this direct realization of emptiness. This is the goal of this type of study, is to eventually get to that place where we know this truth in a very, very intimate way, because it's no longer even conceptual. It's a direct realization. And by virtue of that, when we come out of that meditative equipoise, that state of meditation, we know that everything that exists in the world is empty of inherent existence as well. And we understand how it's just, again, existing through this mere imputation, mere designation. I'm going to go into some of these concepts probably next week, maybe the week after, to kind of ground ourselves in them as we get into the deeper exploration that Avalokiteshvara is doing around all these various phenomena. Did that help a little bit, Dawn? Or did I add more confusion?
Yes, yeah. That I mean, I'm confused, obviously, but yes, no, that's it's interesting that
Okay.
it's the object, the emptiness, the subject, that's the object. So the wisdom that we have is hopefully at some point going to realize that.
Exactly.
So,
And I mean, your mind has an emptiness corresponding with it too. But again, your mind is a conventional phenomenon. It's a conventional truth, whereas emptiness is an ultimate truth that we can know through our minds. Yeah. Well, we do have to kind of wrap things up, so there can be this little discussion about discussion groups. Those who would like to participate can stay on, but let's go ahead and just do really quickly, if Bob could put the dedication prayers, because I think I'll do the dedication prayers with all of you, and then I'm going to leave the little Zoom room. And if there are some of you that aren't interested in doing discussion group, you're welcome to leave as well. But those folks who stay on, Shanka's going to lead a little discussion and try to determine what would be a good time for all of you to meet. I know that might be hard depending on how many people are there, what works for everybody's time zone and what have you. But at least have some discussion about that. So for the remainder of these weeks, we can have that going on. All right. So let's do our dedication prayers as usual. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then the prayers for our precious teachers, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then for Osalhita, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Then lastly, just dedicate to send this positive energy out, dedicated for all those beings that we're holding in our hearts right now, who we've offered to pray for or want to pray for, or even those who've asked us to pray for them. Think that it goes out and relieves their suffering immediately and helps all of them to attain perfect happiness and peace. And may all beings find true happiness and peace through what we've done here tonight. All right, wonderful. So keep in mind, again, on the quizzes, I'm just about one question behind on each of them. So we got the third question of quiz 3 tonight, but we didn't get the third question of quiz 4. So you might be a little bit behind still in terms of the material, but I will catch up, as I said, won't be a problem. So, all right, so again, please stay on if you would like to discuss participating in a discussion group that would be outside of this forum. Might even discuss how long you want that discussion group to take place, half hour, 45 minutes, hour, whatever you're comfortable with. But again, stay on if you're wanting to do that, and Shanka will take over. All right, wonderful. Thank you all so much. Everyone be well.
Thank you.